Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or a personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Dr. Jennifer Freyd. Dr. Freyd is a world renowned psychologist, researcher, and author whose groundbreaking work has reshaped our understanding of trauma, memory, and betrayal. Over the past 4 years, she's been at the forefront of studying how the people and institutions we trust the most can cause the deepest harm, and more importantly, how we can heal from it. As an internationally recognized expert on betrayal trauma, she's revealed how our minds adapt to survive when those closest to us, parents, partners, mentors, institutions, etc., betray our trust. Her research has revolutionized the way we understand trauma responses, showing that forgetting, denial, and even self blame can be coping mechanisms rather than signs of weakness. She's also the founder of the Center of Institutional Courage, where she sheds light on institutional betrayal, how organizations, workplaces, and systems protect abusers and silence survivors instead of standing for justice. Her work provides not just a diagnosis of these failures, but a blueprint for courage, integrity, and real systemic change. Her book, Betrayal Trauma, delves into the complex and often hidden world of betrayal, explaining why survivors so often struggle to name their experience and why healing requires more than just remembering. It requires breaking through the silence and reclaiming self trust. Through her work, she has given language to the pain that had none, validated the experiences of countless survivors, and proven that even in the face of betrayal, whether personal or institutional, healing is possible, justice is worth fighting for, and courage is contagious. So, Dr. Fry, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being my guest.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
I gave a brief introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better, would you mind giving us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got to who and where you are today?
Sure. I moved a lot when I was a kid, but spent more time in Philadelphia than anywhere else, and decided that I wanted to go save the world in some way. And my first idea was I would become a lawyer and then a judge, and I would help abuse children, and then I would become a senator and somehow save the world that way. And um, it turned out like I actually ran for an elected office, and I won one thing, and I was like, "Oh no, this isn't the right course for me." But I still want to save the world. And
Mhm.
so in college, I tried all sorts of different topics and kept thinking, "Oh, I'll do this, I'll do that, art, anthropology, philosophy." And then I took a psychology class, and that was it. I just fell so in love with psychology. And my first passion in psychology was perception and memory. And I studied those topics and developed my own set of theories and research and went on to become a professor. And all of that was through mostly through the late 70s and 1980s. And then around 1990, in those years, I was touched personally by the issue of family trauma and child abuse, and specifically remembering things I had forgotten for some period of time. And although here I was, at that time, I already had tenure, a successful professor, I was married, I had 2 kids, I had a good life, I did not know how to make sense of what I was going through. I hadn't learned about it in all that schooling. And so part of what happened for me was that I turned my intellectual energy into trying to understand what I was going through. And I did a lot of reading because, I tried to understand that other people studied these issues, what was known about all these topics that were becoming relevant to me. And I saw that also there was a lot going on in the world around me. So I was reading a lot of popular press about other people who'd been abused and how they were coping. And all that led me to develop a theory that I called betrayal trauma theory. And it was really about how people might not fully see or remember severe betrayals in their life and why that was actually probably something that was a part of survival. So I can explain betrayal trauma theory, but I've said a lot about, how I got there. So let me find out from you where you want me to go now.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's fascinating that you were 10 years in and didn't really have the words or the language to even understand what was going on internally for you. Um, was there a certain point where what you were learning and what you have been through kind of intersected and you thought to yourself, wow, I have to dig deeper in this and try and figure this out more?
I mean, yes. I mean, one of the things that people may not realize is that for a very long time, child abuse was a taboo topic
Mhm.
in the academic world and in the mental health world. There weren't, now people talk about it a lot, but they really didn't. 40 years ago, it was really not a talked about topic, and it was just starting to become really of interest in the sort of the press and the popular world, in the late '80s, and but still not really in the academic world. So I think one of the experiences I had that was so profound was going through something very, very intense for me personally, and being a professor of psychology and not having that knowledge, and so needing to figure things out. One of the, things I figured out fairly early on was that the theories that I could find out there about why you would forget or be unaware of a terrible thing that had happened to you didn't really make sense. So there was a theory that people would forget or remain unaware because it was just so terrible. And who wants to remember or know about something terrible? Well, yeah, but we're not designed that way. It's really hard to just decide not to know something. And in fact, if you think about, the things, lots of things that are terrible, like if somebody were to lose their own child through, illness or accident or violence, that's a very, very terrible thing. But people generally can't forget that. It's not an easy thing to put out of your mind unless you use substances. I mean, people will use substances to forget, but just doing it without substances, even if you want to, is really, really hard. And yet there are other things people do forget. And one of the things that people do forget is childhood abuse experiences. It's not the only thing. People forget of other things too, but that's a very common one that people will forget. Well, it didn't take me too long to realize that the things people forget have a have at their core, they are betrayals. Those are the things that really lead to forgetting. And child abuse by a caregiver is an enormous betrayal. Another kind of thing people will sometimes be unaware of and not see and forget is abuse by a partner, where they're in a close relationship and they're being mistreated by the other person. That's a huge betrayal. So, you know, that was an insight that I then needed to figure out. And what I came to theorize and then spent a lot of time testing the theory through research was that we forget betrayals because it is dangerous to know about. What makes a betrayal dangerous to know about? The thing that makes it dangerous to know about a betrayal is that the way people respond to betrayals, if they're fully empowered, is that they feel very strongly negative. They feel they've been cheated, they've been harmed, and then what do? They either confront the betrayer or they essentially run away and say, "I'm not gonna be part of this anymore." Those 2 responses of confrontation and running away, kind of like fight and flight, um, that's not gonna work if you're really dependent on the person betraying you. It's dangerous. If you fight or you run away and you're dependent on somebody, that's probably only gonna make matters worse for you. So what can you do in that situation? What you can do is suppress that knowledge of betrayal. And this, this fits in very well with what we know about the human attachment system. The attachment system is um, what keeps people who are taking care of us um, very engaged in that relationship. So if you think of a little baby and a caregiver, the caregiver, the adults giving so much time, attention, and resources to the baby, what's the adult getting back? Well, turns out the adult, because of the attachment system, is getting this huge reward. We are designed to find it very rewarding to have the creature, our own child, a pet, whatever it is that we're taking care of, give us something back. And that giving back can be smiles and coos and a relationship. That's very rewarding. And anyone who's had kids or been around kids knows how rewarding that is. That smile, that little giggle, it's very
Mhm.
rewarding. And we're biologically programmed that way. So that attachment system keeps us in relationships. And it knows in some profound way it better not see the betrayal in order to keep things going. And that's the kind of core idea of betrayal trauma. And then there I was with a laboratory. I had tenure, so I could do research on whatever I wanted, in theory anyway. There was a lot of resistance to me doing research in this area because it wasn't what I had been doing and was a kind of taboo topic. But nonetheless, I did. And my students and I went on to do many studies looking at the relationship between betrayal and outcomes. Is it true what I hypothesized that betrayal leads to more forgetting? And then what else does it do? And we found out, yes, it's true. Betrayal leads to more forgetting and unawareness, but it's also associated with all sorts of other challenges, all sorts of trauma symptoms. So it really led us on a whole long journey into the field of trauma psychology. But I had not ever known I was going to go on until there I was on that journey. And more recently, um, my my students and I have focused a lot of our attention on the trauma, the betrayal trauma that's caused not just by one other individual, like a parent or a partner, but the betrayal trauma that can be caused by whole institutions. Big ones like churches or schools or the government, hospitals, or smaller ones like families, smaller communities. And we found that betrayal trauma can occur in those situations as well. And often it's really profoundly hurtful to people. It often takes the form, if somebody has an interpersonal trauma in the context of an institution, and then the institution makes it worse. So, an example, one of the first examples we really looked at was people who'd been in the military saying, well, I joined the military to serve my country. But when I got there, I got sexually assaulted or raped by another service member or even a commanding officer. And then when I tried to get help or get justice, things got even worse. In fact, the response from the military was even worse than the initial assault. And if somebody says something is worse than a sexual assault, I think you need to stop and listen because sexual assault's terrible. And, indeed, we know from research and case studies, people can commit suicide over this. It is it is just devastating to people sometimes to be betrayed by institutions. Um, One of the ways I understand that is that same old attachment system I was talking about. Babies attach to their caregivers, and that's why they keep giving them all these cooing and, adorable responses. That attachment system, it'll attach to, stuffed animals. Our attachment system will attach to, I used to love boa constrictors. They don't they probably don't love me back, but I could love a boa constrictor. But it can also attach to institutions, and most people, if they think about it, they realize, "Oh, yeah, I do love my church, or I love my sports team or my school. And that's very, very human. But just like that snake can't love me back, in fact, those institutions can't love a person back either. But it doesn't stop us from loving the institution. As soon as you love something and you're attached, you are vulnerable to betrayal. And, it's a great thing about us. I love that we love things, but it does make us vulnerable when the thing we love betrays us.
Thank you for sharing that. And I mean, I got so much from that. Number one, just based off the last thing you said, it sounds like love can be dangerous if we allow ourselves to attach to something that may not have the ability to love us back.
Yeah, I don't think we can help it. I mean, I don't think I it I I don't think people can n turn off that attachment, but it is dangerous.
Sure. And then if you, I guess, also mix in attachment injuries from childhood or childhood trauma or betrayal, we may be looking to attach to something to feel seen and heard. And, with the example you gave of the military, a lot of people go to the military to try and escape hard things that they've had to deal with in their lives. And I'm sure it doesn't happen all the time, but for the instances to where it does happen, like if were in an abusive family system and you go to the military and you get abused there too, like you may not ever feel like it's safe to love or trust again.
That's so true. What you're saying is so true. People, often do look for institutions to help them heal from family trauma.
Mm,
And then if the institution harms them, it's one of the things I often say is that you might think, "Oh, if you've been traumatized a lot or a certain amount, new traumas aren't gonna really bother you because 'cause you've already kind of had that experience." Kinda like maybe you got inoculated. It doesn't work that way at all. It's much more like a concussion. Once you've gotten your head damaged through a concussion, injured, if you get another concussion right away, that's really bad because the injury makes you more vulnerable. And betrayal's like that. Once you've been betrayed, if you get betrayed again, it's like it sort of multiplies. And people don't wanna make it sound like it's always terrible for people because people can't heal, and if people, do the work, then they don't have to be suffering their whole life from betrayal, but for people who've, you know, not had that opportunity to heal, and they come out of a family that's betrayed them, and yeah, the military looks like it's gonna take care of them. I mean, it's a very sort of all-inclusive experience, right? You're gonna get your meals, and you're gonna get your clothing, you're gonna get everything in this community, and people, often feel they're very patriotic, they want to be part of something bigger and positive and good, and so they can attach really quickly to their military unit, and have very high hopes for how it's gonna be noble, they'll be respected, they'll be treated well, and then they get raped. And then when they try to deal with it, they get punished. So just enormous betrayals, and you can really understand how there's gonna be so vulnerable in that situation. But, I never want people to feel bad about their vulnerability because it comes from the best parts of us, right? It's good that we can love. It's good that we, have hope that things will be better. It really, the problem is not that people are vulnerable. The problem is that other people take advantage of that.
mm. Thank you for sharing that too. For individuals who have experienced betrayal as a child or, any type of abuse, like we said, it may be difficult to learn to trust or love again. What was your experience like growing up as far as your relationship with trust? Were you able to learn to trust, or were you able to be vulnerable, or were you closed off?
That's a good question. I had a quite dysfunctional family that I grew up in, and there was quite a bit of things that hurt me, but I was really able to kind of compartmentalize and didn't let myself dwell very much on that. And when I look at my teenage years, I see, I behaved like a troubled person at the same time that I
Mm,
was also a high achiever. So I kind of both was a juvenile delinquent and good at school. It was an interesting combination. And, I was able to go to college and do well in college, even though I was actually um, quite messed up psychologically in a lot of ways. Um, over time, and I don't think I knew how to trust particularly. Um, over time, I was lucky to find really healing relationships in my life. And the most important one was finding a partner who I was married to for over 30 years. He did die of cancer, but it was an amazing partnership. And I also did eventually seek out and go into therapy, but I had to heal a lot before I could even know I needed to go to therapy. It
mm,
took me, probably 10 years of healing before I even knew there was something needing therapy as well. And I had a really good therapist too. But it was a lot of work. I mean, and I
mm,
think one of the motivations that I had for that going into therapy was by then I had children. And I, realized how important it was to be a good parent, to protect the children from the kind of harms that I had experienced and so on, and that I really needed professional help to get to that point. But it was decades of work.
mm,
And so, yeah, I feel like I'm pretty good at trust now, not perfect. Um, but with trust, it's like a Goldilocks thing, isn't it? You don't want to trust sort of willy-nilly and trust the wrong people, and you don't want to never trust because then you can't have any close relationships. I mean, all intimacy requires trust, and so you have to find that sweet spot in the middle.
mm,
And that takes work. And another thing I think about is if you've been really good at forgetting and not seeing things, the what I call betrayal blindness as a way to deal with betrayal trauma, that ability to block out information, it's going to take a while to stop blocking out information. And so, one of the things that happens for people is they find themselves repeatedly getting into relationships where they get hurt. And other people say, well, why'd you date that guy or that woman? Isn't it obvious that they were going to hurt you because look at how they behave? But the, the victim of betrayal in that situation, they're not seeing the same reality that maybe their friends can see because they've gotten really good at blocking out the betrayal. So, yeah, it can take a long time to regain that ability.
mm. That's so interesting, and it makes a lot of sense too. And I'm very grateful that you shared that it was a lot of work even for you to heal and learn to trust again in therapy, because it shows that even someone with as much knowledge and experience as you still has to do the work, and it shows that there's a human side to all of us. The betrayal trauma theory that you have developed is literally incredible and so fascinating. I wanted to ask, what is the difference between betrayal trauma and other forms of trauma?
I mean, there's lots of different kinds of trauma, and they can vary in how much betrayal they have. It's not like, just two separate things. There's like almost a continuum. Um, so extreme betrayal trauma is when you're victimized by somebody that you depend on, has power over you, that you have a reason, at least initially, to trust. But really, that power and dependence is the crucial component of it. So any child situation, there's probably going to be some amount of betrayal trauma because children are always depending on adults around them. But especially if it's a caregiver, a parent, or
Mm.
somebody very close to the child, adults continue to be dependent and have power relationships. So um, people who are in a marriage where there's any kind of power asymmetry they can be very dependent economically or in other ways and have betrayal. The other complicated thing about betrayal is it can happen in the aftermath of an event. So a trauma that might seem like it doesn't have a lot of betrayal is, let's say, you're caught in a hurricane or you're in an automobile accident. It's not the, the thing that the thing that's happened there is not another person betraying you. But what happens after that? We know hurricanes are a great example because um, the community can respond well or terribly, and it can turn into a betrayal situation. So, I mean, you look at Katrina in New Orleans some years back, where it was a terrible betrayal for people because of all the mess ups that occurred. Um, in an automobile accident, if if everyone's really honestly trying to help each other and support each other and people come forward and do all the right things, there doesn't have to be betrayal, but it can often go in a really bad direction where the victim in an automobile accident is betrayed by uh, the other drivers or the system around them. So that complicates it. Then there's betrayals that are, I might call medium betrayals, where another human did something to you, but it isn't a human you had a relationship with, or that you had a reason to trust. So this might be you are, walking down the street and some stranger comes and hurts you. That doesn't have the relationship betrayal that occurs when you're attached to somebody. But it is, it's one human hurting another. There's still an element, kind of maybe a lower amount of betrayal. So in a research context, we kind of categorize these as high, medium, and low betrayal events. And we look at the effects of these different kinds of events on people. One of the fascinating things we have found is that there's something of a gender effect where men and boys tend to have more experiences of low and medium betrayal relative to girls and women, whereas girls and women tend to have more experiences of high betrayal. I mean, both boys, all groups have experiences of both kinds of trauma, um, but when you just look statistically, girls and women are more likely to be subjected to the high betrayal, and boys and men are more likely to be subjected to the low and medium betrayal. In terms of real world, what does that mean? But you can think about something like physical assault. So if you look at who's been victimized in physical assault, it's um, for girls and women, it's more likely to be somebody they're close to. Whereas boys and men often get attacked by somebody they don't really know very well. So it's it's bad. All of these things are bad things to happen to people, but they do have different effects on the aftermath.
Mm.
Another dimension besides gender is any other kind of power asymmetry in society. So anyone who's in a less powerful position is more um, more vulnerable to be the victim of betrayal trauma because they're more likely to be in that power under role, and the more powerful can victimize them.
Mm. Um, Speaking about betrayal by a loved one or someone who's close to you as opposed to a stranger, for instance, let's say a young boy is um, assaulted by maybe someone at church. Not only is that someone close to him, but it's also something that may have been close to his heart, in that now church or religion may be something that's now he's unable to ever feel attached to again. How can that type of dynamic affect a person?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I feel like the research on this is just beginning to emerge. I mean, people have been studying like clergy abuse, spiritual abuse of various
Mm,
kinds, but the specific issue of betrayal in those contexts is there are studies now, and there's a beginning to be a research literature, and people often describe to me a situation like you just said, that they were a kid and they were abused by somebody in their church, a grown up who they trusted and admired, and that it harmed not only their sense of trust in adults around them, but also their spiritual and religious well-being. And I think it's really profound for people, and we need a whole lot more work on how to address that than we have so far.
I think one of the most devastating things about betrayal trauma is often that survivors blame themselves. Why is that, that you found in your research?
Well, I think it's uh, partly, I think it's a couple different reasons survivors blame themselves. First of all, perpetrators try to make survivors blame themselves often. So that's a perpetrator strategy. And families, the institutional betrayal can be about blaming the survivor. But there's also a protective element of self-blame for the survivor in a couple ways. One, if they take the blame into themselves, that it helps them with the betrayal blindness because they can still stay attached to somebody if they think it's their fault. It's much
Mm,
easier to stay attached if you take the blame yourself. And then, also there's this element of if it's my fault, then next time I can do it differently and not have this thing happen to me. So there's also the sort of magical thinking part of it that you can have more control than probably you really have by thinking it's your fault. So my guess is that those a number of factors pushing in that direction. We also know we know from research that we've done on a related topic, which maybe you were planning to talk about, but if not, I'll bring up, which is what I call DARVO. Are you familiar with DARVO?
mm-mm.
Okay, good. Um, um, DARVO is an acronym that stands for Deny, Attack, and Reverse Victim and Offender. So DARVO. And it was a pattern I observed, and I came up with that acronym 30 years ago. And I wrote about it, but I didn't do much with it. And then starting about 15 years ago, we started to research it, and a lot of people in various sort of other walks of life picked up on the term. During the Me Too, it was used by some of the celebrities, and it's been in the news a lot as well regarding the behavior of politicians. It's a DARVO is a tactic that a perpetrator can use when that person's being held accountable. So if I go up to this person and I say, you really hurt me, you did this bad thing to me, the person can say, no, I didn't. And then they can say, there's something wrong with your memory. You've got this memory problem, or you have mental health problems. You don't know what you're talking about. And you're accusing me. You're hurting me. You're ruining my reputation. That's the RVO. So the no, I didn't, that's the deny. The attack as usually on credibility. There's something wrong with your memory, with your motivation. The RVO, the person who actually did the hurtful thing, takes the victim role and puts the person who was victimized but raised the issue into the offender role. It's very, very tricky and it's very effective. And it goes on all the time. If you think about how people, because it's all often, on TV, you think about how some high profile person responds when they've been accused of something, they often do this whole DARVO playbook. Well, we know from research when people experience DARVO, they are more likely to blame themselves. That's what I meant when I say perpetrators can really induce self-blame too. They can make the person feel that it's their fault by what they say. So all of those are reasons people blame themselves. But I really, really don't want people to blame themselves being for being harmed by other people. I mean, we each are responsible for what we do after that happens, and we're responsible for not hurting other people. But it's usually not the person who's been victimized their fault that they were harmed.
Mhm. Especially if there is an element of attachment there, if you're dependent on the person and not being attached to them can cause some sort of destabilization, whether it's financial or any number of things. If blaming yourself means that you can still have that attachment, I can see how that could
Yeah,
probably increase the probability of that as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, no, people do it all the time. You think about, like, when there's been infidelity in a relationship, and then the person who's been kind of victimized by that, you might say, because it's their fault, they've somehow messed up in the relationship, then they can stay in that relationship that they might feel very dependent upon. So
Mhm.
it's can be very adaptive. Blame yourself.
Mhm. You're right that knowledge of betrayal is always destabilizing. Once someone starts to really see clearly what happened, how do they begin to reorganize their understanding of themselves and the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a crisis for people often, especially if, they've been living with a certain kind of betrayal blindness for a long time, and then suddenly it breaks through. It can be a really big psychological crisis. And um, it can be almost like it just something terrible just happened to them. And they can really, need a lot of support from others around them and time to process their feelings and sort of figure out their life and sort things
Mhm.
out. And so it often is followed by that realization's followed by a period often of crisis and, challenge. It In the long run, it can lead to a much better way of being in the world than betrayal blindness. I mean, betrayal blindness is adaptive in the sense that it might keep you alive if you're dependent on somebody, and it got you through a situation, but it comes with costs because then you can't fully know reality, and it
Mhm.
makes it hard to have new healthy relationships. But so the best thing is if you can break the betrayal blindness, really understand reality as much as anybody can, and heal. That's the best. But you don't get there just like snapping your fingers and it's all, picnic in the park. Usually it kind of gets worse for a while. You suffer as you figure it out, and you feel a lot of feeling and pain, and you have to do a lot of hard work. But then you get to a better.
What is the cost of betrayal blindness on the nervous system, the body, and a person's sense of self?
Yeah, I don't know the answer entirely to that. I think that is a I'll say what researchers say. We need
Sure.
more research. I think I think that we don't know entirely the cost of betrayal blindness on the body, for instance. I'm sure there are costs, but I don't know what they are exactly.
Thank you for your honesty. Um, you didn't just stop at the interpersonal. Your work on institutional betrayal has shown that entire systems can betray survivors by silencing them, covering up abuse, or even failing to respond. Um, what does this type of betrayal look like in practice?
Yeah, but institutional betrayal, what I call it, can take many forms. So one form is very overt. I would say when a government orders genocide on some of its citizens, or people somewhere else for that matter. That is overt institutional betrayal. That's a case where an institution is betraying people, and especially if it's part of, ordering genocide on some of their own citizens, that's like
Mhm.
extreme betrayal. I can think of lots of examples where institutions, particularly governments, have taken actions that I would say are overt betrayals. You know, there was a time about 6, 7 years ago when the U.S. government was separating families at the southern border and taking parents and kids and separating them. And many of us, when we found out about this, felt enormous pain at that information. I think that was betrayal. I think we were feeling the pain of institutional betrayal, even though most of us were not the direct victims of that. But it was an institution that we had dependence on, our own government, that was doing this harmful thing to other human beings. Very overt.
Mhm.
So another way that institutional betrayal often happens is a failure to prevent a bad thing or a failure to respond well when a bad thing happens.
Mhm.
So one of the kinds of institutional betrayal I've studied a lot with my students, and a lot of other researchers have now too, is when there's sexual assault in the context of an educational institution. It could be a high school or college, and the often the institution is partly responsible for having failed to prevent it from happening in the first place. So the institution can be betraying in its poor response. And part of why this is such a betrayal is these institutions present themselves, and we understand them as having a duty to protect and to respond well. So, hospitals, that's another place where you can get a lot of institutional betrayal. Well, obviously, when you go to a hospital, you think that they are going to take good care of you. You need to believe that.
Mhm.
But if they harm you, blame you for a mistake they made, um, fail to prevent mistakes, those are always, that you get betrayed, and you had every right to believe that they were going to have your best interests at the forefront, and then they didn't. They
Mhm.
did this thing to you. So we've measured uh, institutional betrayal in these kind of failures to prevent and failures to respond well. We've measured the effect of that, and we found it's associated with all sorts of harm. So people are more likely to have the trauma symptoms after institutional betrayal. And you could compare directly. So you can look at people who were sexually assaulted when there was institutional betrayal, and people who were sexually assaulted when there was not institutional betrayal. And sexual assault's always bad for people, but the ones who
Sure.
had sexual assault with betrayal are suffering more. They have more trauma symptoms, more physical symptoms. It's just bad for them. It's just not like adding an additional layer of harm to people.
Mhm. So, for an individual or victim who suffered from betrayal trauma and they are beginning to wake up, whether that trauma was from an institution or a loved one, what's one of the first things that you'd want them to know?
Don't blame yourself.
Mhm.
And if you loved the institution and you trusted the institution, that wasn't a bad thing. You had every right to, think positively. And so that's one thing. Another is that, you might be able to seek justice. You might be able to get the institution to do something to sort of restore some of what they took away. And, I always think that I love this quote from trauma theorist Judith Herman, that she attributes to her mother, but I got it from her, which is the best antidote to despair is activism. And one of the things that I've found in my own life, and a lot of people that I've talked to who've suffered institutional betrayal find that it's really helpful is if they put some time and attention into trying to fix the institution, even if it's not for like their own justice, their own, like some people would file a lawsuit, okay, but separate from that, they can just try to get the institution to reform its ways so that
Mm.
other people are not going to have that same experience. And that can be so powerful and healing for people to take that bad experience and use it to fuel going out into the world and trying to make the world a better place.
Mm. Thank you for that. Um, it's been said that rebuilding trust after betrayal can feel nearly impossible. Um, how can someone start trusting again and not just others, but also themselves?
Yeah, yeah, hard work. I think the most important thing is to uh, take it slowly. To one of the things that well, I published a book with a co-author named Pamela Burrell, and the book is called Blind to Betrayal, and it was my second book. Um, and in the end of Blind to Betrayal, we actually have a whole chapter on this sort of what to do to recover. And one of the things we advise is to learn how to recognize healthy relationships. And we actually provide some kind of like, list of things you can ask yourself. Is this a healthy relationship? In a healthy relationship, you can learn how to trust again. But you can't learn how to trust again in an unhealthy relationship, or it would be really hard. So the
Mhm.
first step is learning how to find a healthy relationship. And then in that healthy relationship, you can get pretty good at learning how to trust because in close relationships, there are always going to be hurts. That's the nature of a close relationship. And in a healthy one, you can talk about it and you can work it out and you can grow from it. And that will so help you develop the ability to trust again.
Mhm. Thank you for that. Um, you've given so many a language to understand pain that there weren't words for. What has this taught you about healing and humanity and about yourself, your research?
Huh, don't know if I've ever exactly thought of it that way. I do think having concepts and names for concepts helps people make sense of their experiences that seem sort of incoherent sometimes and confusing. So I do think concepts really help. Uh, and I mean, a lot of this work I did in a kind of very, selfish way because I was trying to make sense of my own experiences. I mean, even that DARVO thing, I got DARVO'd. I was trying to figure out what's going on. Why are people
Mhm.
treating me this way? And it it helped to have an explanation. Um, But, it doesn't words alone, concepts alone won't, like, just fix things in a matter of, it's not enough. It's like a starting place. You still need to do the work. And, clearly, I'm a very intellectual person. I like ideas, I like knowledge, I like research. Those are all tools, but they do not take the place of the emotional work that is necessary. I mean, my biggest healing occurred through, really, really good close relationships with my partner and my friends and my therapist. And I was in therapy for 3 years. It was a lot of work. And, and those are really relational and emotional. So, the words and the concepts, they're more intellectual and they are helpful. It's a tool, but you can't just stop there.
Mhm. With all that you're doing to help others, what is it you want people to know most?
Um, I guess finding um, finding the place where you can be hopeful, have your eyes open, be realistic. Don't kid yourself that everything's fine when it's not. and at the same time, don't sink into despair. Find that place where you can you can recognize reality, see there are these problems, and be hopeful that you can make things better, and then, take action to make things better. That's what I
Mm,
want for people.
that's nice. If there was one thing that you would want to be known for or that would define your legacy when it's all said and done, what would you want that to be?
My kids. I I love all my work. I love all these things, but, my kids are my number one, and so being a good parent to my kids and having them thrive, that matters most. Right now, actually, I have a grandchild, and just seeing him develop and thrive, and, having the tools in life to be strong and resilient and kind and caring, all that, that's really the most.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. All right, last question. If you could use your platform to educate anyone who might be struggling with their mental or emotional health and might be uncertain of how or where to start, what would you say?
It's a little hard because it's gonna depend on details of that person's life. I would say that if they can find a person who they can have a good relationship with, I would start with finding somebody they could talk to and really talk through begin to talk through what they're going through. It's hard to do it alone. If they can't find that or they don't know how, a lot can a lot can be gained by writing. Um, you know, People still keep diaries and write down their thoughts, and now, of course, everything's so digital. People
Mm,
put things out there on the internet, but I think there's really something to be said for having private writing. It can be, on a computer, but not putting it out there for the whole world, but writing for oneself and sorting out feelings and thoughts, and then that can lead to being ready to do that in the context of a relationship as well.
mm. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your knowledge and your time. It's been a pleasure to interview you and understand the concepts of betrayal more and to really get a feel for the work that you've put into, giving this language where there wasn't before.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk with you. It's been a pleasure.
I appreciate it. If people want to find you online, where would they be able to find you?
The easiest would be just JJ Freyd, which is Freyd at uh, .com. jjfreyd.com.
And then what about your books?
They're probably easiest to just get online, Amazon or one of the other booksellers. If they just put my name in, Jennifer Freyd, they'll find them. The spelling's weird of my name. It's Freyd.
All right. Well, again, Dr. Fry, thank you so much for this. Thank you for doing the work to give language to survivors who may not have understood what happened to them, for spelling out what betrayal is, what it does to the body, and how you can heal from it. So, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for the way you do it.
Thank you.